So I'm going to hopefully not talk actually that much and get to what you guys want to do, which is workshop, actually work on your specific games. But I'm just going to provide a little bit of background on specific games. We'll do the same thing when we get to the bio sketches after lunch today. So just sort of to go through this, some quick objectives for this particular workshop. The goal is to really generate and actually improve your specific games pages. I used to say generate, but I think everybody actually did that, or almost everybody, which is way different than it was, I think, the last time I actually chaired this several years ago. So I'm super excited that we've sort of moved that. And the goal really here is to obtain feedback, both from the mentors here, but also from your peers who can read these things and provide some feedback, and really to add a little bit of flair, right? The reviewers are going to read lots and lots and lots and lots of these things, so you need it to sort of jump up above the sort of mix of everybody's, and that's sort of what I mean by flair. So here's the recipe. It is a recipe. It's a little bit like, well, this is my grandmother's recipe for apple pie. It's the only way to do it. That's not true. There's millions of grandmothers who have millions of recipes for apple pie. And so this is just sort of a general framework to work from, right? You need certain ingredients to make apple pie. You need them to go in a certain order, but there's a lot of variation in that space. You really need to sort of set up what the problem is and the need and the solution all in that very beginning. There's an unmet critical need. Here's the solution that we have, and sort of what that is. The next thing is really to get into the detail of what that solution is, but why do you need to work on it? Like, what questions remain? And then that's when you get into your specific games. This is how we're going to go about doing that. These are the questions that remain, and here are the aims to address those specific questions. And the last thing is if we do all of this, what will be the impact, right? The significance. The idea here to say we will achieve X by answering these questions. I'm not sure if you guys got this paper or read this. Was this paper sort of assigned reading beforehand? This is great sort of description of how to do a specific games page. Andrew Monty actually was the chair of this thing several years before I was the chair. So, and Ann Libby it was sort of helped me sort of design this presentation as well going forward. So the idea is to generate a little bit of flair, right? It's not just all simple text. Now, I say that in the context of you really want to obey the norms and disciplines of your particular area. I do a fair amount of basic science research with engineers. There's a certain cadence and framework and certain things that are acceptable about, do you have a hypothesis? Do you call out the hypothesis? Where is it in the process? Do you write a lot more detail about the approach under each aim, or is that sort of implied elsewhere? Do you include a figure? I actually did that for the first time in a specific games page just recently, but there are certain norms about that. But the idea is that you want to have something that's unique and maybe just a little non-traditional about it that sort of stands out, and in a way that sort of fits into those norms that doesn't sort of go, ugh, right? But then sort of says, yeah, this is different, this is exciting. I once read one that had like a box written around it. It says, let me be clear, boom, this is what we're going to do, and it just stood out, and you're like, yeah, that's it, I'm sold. The idea is that it's going to emphasize your story, what you're going to achieve. So the idea is you want to have these sticky ideas that are successful. You want it to be the simplest idea possible that you can say in the smallest number of words. The more complicated it is, the more you'll lose somebody. You want it to be a little unexpected. I wasn't thinking that. If they go, oh, I've heard this again, right? This happens a lot with sepsis ideas. One more of these sepsis studies. You don't want that, right? You need it to be very concrete. It's not something that's sort of out there and amorphous. You want to be, this is exactly what we need to do. I'm going to do this drug at this time for this reason. It needs to make sense. It needs to be credible. It needs to be based in the rationale of the science sort of prior to. It can't just be, I pulled this out of the hat. You want to get a little on the emotional side, right? People are struggling. This is the unmet need. This is that sort of feeling that you get when you read that section. Say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that more people are dying of this every day and nobody's doing anything about that. That little emotional hook, right? And the whole thing is a story, right? And we'll talk a little bit about storytelling and suspenseful writing because it's important here, but all of these things, there is a villain, right? That's the problem. There's a hero, that's you, right? And you have a solution. You've got a superpower, right? You've got a thing that you need to do. And so that's sort of what you want to wrap around this, but somehow tuck that into a little bit of scientific writing. And that these little details are sort of what elevate the system, right? I cannot teach you how to come up with a great idea. Jeremy talked about having an idea, finding those ideas. You're going to find ideas, and they're going to be brilliant. But there are lots of them out there and a shortage amount of funding. And what you want to do is bring your idea up to the top of the pack, right? And that's what I'm sort of talking about here. My goal is not to teach you how to do science. My goal is to teach you how to write a specific Ames page that takes your science and brings it up. So, for instance, the best idea in the world can fail because of a poorly written Ames page. Likewise, a sort of a mediocre idea with a lot of flair can actually get funded too. So it's important to get the best idea in the beginning, but once you have it, you can still lose if you don't sort of put this into the writing there. If you're interested in sort of expanding your writing repertoire, there are these TED Ed lessons of this writer's workshop. You can sort of read some different ideas around them, but these ideas of sort of generating sort of fear, establishing a question, this is unknown, it's out there. That sort of creates a little anticipation, makes you want to read more. You want to evoke curiosity, get that idea of like, oh, that's really interesting. How are they going to do that? I need to read deeper. That's what you're trying to achieve, right? There's that sort of journalism thing that you sort of get that hook that they talk about. Some particular storytelling features to think about here are, what is the point of view? Are we providing the point of view of researchers? You're coming up with a new way to do clinical trials. Is it from the patient? The patient is suffering from X, or the providers themselves. These are sort of questions you want to sort of set up, and that, a shifting point of view can get confusing and sort of setting that in there. Imagery can be very good. Sometimes when you're telling stories, this can be sort of really loud, like, you know, doctor to room, whatever, stat. These are interesting, but like the idea is to sort of get these sort of imagery of what you're talking about. When you tell stories, it's good to have a specific change in pace. You don't want it to speak very monotonously and sort of have the same tone and use the same sentence length. Sometimes in scientific writing, we get very long sort of just, you know, phrases and sentences that get very ridiculous. And so having changes in your sentence structure can sort of create cadence, which is very much useful in sort of telling the story. Now, you never have really silence in writing, but sort of pauses. These are the blank spaces, right? It's easy to cram more and more in there by taking out every single space that you can possibly do to get more information. But those pauses are good. It gives the person a moment to breathe and reflect on what you've done. And the last thing is, as I say, you're sort of building up this anticipation and curiosity. But the most important thing you need to do is give them closure. What is the answer? You are providing it, and we're going to do it this way. Right? And so that emotional release is sort of what gives them that sort of feeling. And so what you need to do is say, not only is there's this huge question that we need to answer, and it has this giant significant problem, and here is the solution, here's why that's the solution, and here's how we're going to achieve it. So like I said, everyone has a unique voice. Some maybe non-traditional techniques are maybe to describe a composite case, a case that sort of illustrates the actual problem you're talking about. It sort of brings it down to the level of clinicians that we're very used to. A lot of times, you know, we do talks about a particular disease process where we start with a case, or a little bit more narration on that, or present it as a massive puzzle or problem that needs to be solved. I think a lot of people are used to the idea of a journalist's lead, which is the inverted pyramid, right? We start broad and narrow down onto the topic. The idea is you don't have a lot of space, so that has to be sort of very truncated and say, what is the point I need to know in the first 3 sentences? So how do you sort of do that? And the other thing is to read other people's, right? You guys are going to get to read a whole bunch. You can say, wow, I really like that. That sounded really cool. That made me want to read more. All right, so I've talked for 10 minutes, and I'm only talking for a few bit more, but the idea is to set sort of a mechanism for you guys to work. Because it's one thing to just read these and talk, right? But I'm going to give you a few exercises that will help perhaps sort of give you sort of some direction and guidance for maybe how you want to work in your groups. And you don't have to do any or all of these. The idea is to sort of put them out there as very specific things to sort of focus your discussions on. So the first one is after you've read an Ames page, can you answer these questions? What is the most dramatic or exciting thing on the Ames page? What are you excited about? Who's the hero and who's the villain? And how will we get to resolution? What is the solution? What is the denouement, so to speak, in storytelling words? I really like this one because it's going to move to the very next sort of exercise, which is, can you find 6 keywords that sort of define this? Write out those 6 keywords and sort of say, what is the thing? Sometimes the way to get to 6 keywords is this other sort of exercise, which is probably better for the writer after these discussions, but is to sort of take the specific game page and bring it down to 500 words, and then 250 words, and then 25 words, and then 10 words, and then 6 words. Because if you can get it to that, that is that very simple essence of what you're trying to talk about. And there are these things. I didn't just come up with 6 words. There are these things called 6-word memoirs. So Smith Magazine put this thing together where they asked readers to tell their life story with just 6 words. And they've built actually several series of these, like 6-word memoirs of love and heartbreak, or for teens, or by famous teens and obscure. So you can actually go and read these and actually see them, right? Here's one for Hemingway, which was For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn. That elicits an emotion, right? Did everybody get an emotion from that? I know I did the first time I read it. So the idea is, can you grab and generate a 6-word memoir of your specific games page? It's a fun exercise to do as you're trying to sort of put these things together. The last thing I want to say is, look, the whole point of this is to get help. The more people who read your specific games page, the more you will be able to hone it and tighten it down and get it into a place that people are like, I get it. It's very important to understand that your readers, the reviewers, are highly intelligent, but not necessarily in your field. And they will ask questions that don't make sense to you because they don't quite get it. And if they do, that means you didn't convey the story well. It's very easy to be like, they didn't get it, there's something wrong with them, and you get defensive. But if they're confused, then you just weren't clear enough. The idea is to ask open-ended questions. Did you get it? Did you understand what I was trying to achieve? What was exciting? Are you missing something? Are you like left at the end like, how are they going to do that? That doesn't make any sense to me. And the idea is to really sort of put that emotion, right? Enthusiasm. If you see, I've bolded a lot of emotional words in this. The idea is to sort of inject that into what you're talking about, right? And so, for instance, one of the things I almost always do when somebody sends me a specific game page, and this is my recipe, I think a specific game should start with an action verb every single time. Observe this, quantify this, measure this. That's not the only way to do it, but I really find that that sort of injects like meaning into it. If it starts with a sort of a more passive verb sort of thing, we're going to consider, it seems sort of flat and boring, right? Just start with that sort of heavy one. So I think that's my last slide for this.